Hello, I'm Cheyenne White, and this is my presentation on chapters 4 through 6 of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Starting with chapter 5, it talks about Linda and how her uncle Benjamin are different. Linda highlights Benjamin's fighting spirit and willpower and the events and details she gives us about his life. She talks about a time when Benjamin did not come to his master immediately after he was called to, and he was whipped for it. Benjamin fought back and threw his master to the ground. After this happened, Ben went to tell his mother goodbye and that he was leaving to go north. He believed that he was not meant for the life of a slave, and he made sure that he did not have to live it. He took his stand and ran away to the north. He was caught on a ship and recognized by the captain, and then taken back to his master, who put him in jail for many months. Benjamin's mother and Linda went to his cell the first night he was there, and they tried to talk him out of his reasonings. They wanted him to trust God, but he would not take their advice, and he kept choosing to not call on God when he needed help. Benjamin stayed in jail for months. All the while, his mother and Linda brought him good food and fresh clothes. His master was not doing anything with him unless he could sell him. He ended up being bought by a slave trader for $300. Benjamin escaped and made it to Baltimore. He was recognized by a man that was the neighbor of his master, but the man let him go. Ben then proceeded on to New York, where he ran into his brother Philip, who gave him some clothes and some money. Philip told Ben that their mother was saving money to buy his freedom. Yet Ben did not want to be bought by anyone, especially his mother. Then they went their separate ways. Ben was now free, and Philip went home to tell his mother that he saw Ben and that he was doing okay. Ben never saw his family after that. In chapter 5, things take a disturbing turn. This chapter is all about Linda. It starts out when she turns 15. Her master begins his trend of whispering awful things to her. Her master does this with other girls, not just Linda. Linda tells us about how her master was trying to change her whole temperament and make her into some sort of monster with the things he was saying. Linda hated him for it, but she was a slave and she knew she had to put up with it. Linda is at the point where she is growing into a woman, and she is now taking the turn from innocent child to her master's servant. She feels the hatred of the mistress because of what the master does with her. Linda shows the great sadness she feels for young slave girls as they grow up and learn about what the world is really like for them. Most of all, she focuses on the awful shift from being innocent to hating the life that they had. Linda explains the process well. She talks about how hearing the master come towards her turned into something very scary, and how young girls hate their beauty instead of embracing it. Linda is sad because she has no one to talk to about what the master does to her. She is scared that he will punish her for telling anyone. She goes from a happy, lively girl to a quiet woman very quickly after the master begins his gross behavior. She offers her grievances for the young girls that she sees around her, who she knows will most certainly grow up to face the same fate as her. Then in the last part of the chapter, Linda goes on to praise the men and women who stand up and fight for the slaves, and she thanks God for them. Chapter 6 follows the same theme as Chapter 5, but it takes it into more detail. It starts out with Linda giving examples of some of the things she would rather do than be a pampered slave. All the things that she lists are awful and harsh things in her eyes, but they are better than being a special slave because of what comes with that title. Mrs. Flint is the master's wife, and she is suspicious of all the young slave girls that deal directly with her husband. She knows that Mr. Flint has bad tendencies, and she keeps a close eye on it, especially when Linda comes into the picture. The master becomes so obsessed with Linda, and he takes her everywhere he goes. He does a lot of bad things to her, and she must deal with it or risk being punished severely. Linda tries to avoid him, but he is relentless. Linda gets so sick of his behavior that she threatens him with her grandmother. Her grandmother has been known to be a fiery woman who's not afraid to use a gun on occasion. The master quickly shuts her down by threatening her with death if she ever were to tell. By that time, Linda was 16, and Mrs. Flint had grew quite tired of her. Any time that Linda and the master were together, Mrs. Flint was there keeping a watchful eye. She would get extremely angry at her husband if he ever did anything suspicious. It got to the point where Mrs. Flint would stand over Linda while she slept just to make sure that nothing was going on between her and her husband. She was so jealous and angry with Linda for what the master did with her. Linda feared for her life at times because of the jealousy Mrs. Flint had. Linda was caught in the middle of a war between the husband and wife because they would often argue about her. At the end of this chapter, Linda talks about other masters and their wives who do a similar thing. The wives she talks about know what their husbands do, and they keep track of the children they produce with the slaves, and they make sure that they are the first ones sold off the plantation. Linda then shows her disapproval of how society can be so wrong. These are the 3 chapters I used for sources. Thank you for watching my presentation.